Welcome. Find a comfortable place to rest and let the day fade away. Tonight, you're sitting beside a quiet campfire deep in the mountains. The flames crackle softly, the air is cool, and the woods stretch out into the darkness beyond the light. These are campfire stories, the kind shared in low voices after the fire has burned down to embers. Stories meant to be listened to slowly, with no rush, no distractions. Just you, the fire, and the night around you. All you have to do is get cozy, let your breathing slow, and allow the stories to drift you gently toward sleep. So settle in and let the campfire tell its tale. People think the Appalachian Mountains are quiet. They're not. They just don't waste sound. I grew up in Southwest Virginia, close enough to West Virginia that the radio stations bled together and the mountains didn't bother learning where one state ended and the other began. When you live there long enough, you learn two things quickly. First, never underestimate how fast the weather can turn. Second, if the woods answer you, don't answer back. I didn't learn the second rule until it was too late. We were 3 days into a fall camping trip, just past the Virginia-West Virginia line. No marked trails, no cell service, just a hand-drawn map my friend Eli swore his uncle had used for years. The kind of place hunters liked because nobody else wanted to hike that far in. The forest was dense. Oak, hickory, and hemlock packed so tight the sunlight came down in thin, dusty beams. Everything smelled like wet leaves and cold earth. It felt ancient, older than maps. The first night was perfect. Fire crackling, coffee boiling, wind humming through the ridges. We heard the usual things: owls, something rustling far off, branches popping as the temperature dropped. Then, just before we turned in, we heard a voice. Hey, clear, calm, male. It came from deeper in the trees. We froze. Eli stood up. Someone out there? No answer. We waited, just the fire and the wind. Probably another camper, Eli said, sitting back down. Or someone hunting. I didn't like it. The voice hadn't sounded like it was shouting. It sounded like it was standing close and didn't need to raise itself. Still, we laughed it off. That was our first mistake. The second night, things changed. It started with footsteps, not circling us, not approaching, just walking, back and forth. Too slow to be a deer, too heavy to be a fox. Every time we shined a flashlight, the sound stopped. Then, from the dark, "Y'all camping out here?" Same voice, same tone, but closer. Eli answered before I could stop him. Yeah, just for a few nights. There was a pause, a long one. Then the voice said, "You shouldn't." Not threatening, not warning, just stating a fact. I asked, "Why not?" Another pause. Then it said my name. Not yelled, not guessed. Spoken the way someone does when they're standing right beside you. Because you don't belong to the mountain yet. I never told anyone my name. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, we packed up early. The woods felt wrong, too still, like everything was holding its breath. No birds, no wind. Even our footsteps sounded louder than they should have. That's when we found the boot prints. Barefoot, human-shaped, but wrong. Too long. Toes stretched out like they'd been pulled. They led away from our camp, then circled back, not once, not twice, over and over, like something had been walking around us all night. Eli tried to laugh it off. Some guy messing with us. But his hands were shaking. We decided to hike out. That's when the voice came back. From behind us, then from ahead, then from the trees to our left. Hey, 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 Same voice, different directions, never yelling, never whispering, just close enough. We started running. The trail twisted downhill, roots grabbing at our boots. Somewhere behind us, branches snapped, but not like something chasing, like something matching our pace. Then Eli tripped. When I turned back to grab him, the woods went silent, dead silent. No wind, no insects, no birds. Eli was staring into the trees, pale as paper. "It's using my voice now," he said. Before I could ask what he meant, I heard it. My own voice, calling his name. Perfect, exact, even my nervous stutter. "Eli, hey man, come here." The sound came from the woods, not from me. I grabbed Eli and pulled him up. We ran until our lungs burned and the trail spit us out onto a gravel road just before dark. We never looked back. We never talked about it again. Years later, I ran into an old hunter at a gas station near the border. He noticed the topo map tattoo on my arm and asked where I'd camped. When I told him, his face changed. He said, "You hear something answer you?" I nodded. He sighed. "That's the one who answers back. Been there longer than the trees. It listens, learns, tries you on to see if you fit." I asked him what happens if it decides you do. He looked at me and said, "Yeah, then the mountain keeps you." I don't camp in Appalachia anymore, and when I'm alone in the woods, I never answer back. There's a fishing hole I don't talk about anymore. Not because I'm afraid people will go looking for it, but because I'm afraid of what happens when someone remembers it exists. Some places don't want to be forgotten. They don't fade. They wait. I found the fishing hole on accident, the way most bad things seem to find you, when you're not paying attention and you think you're alone. I'd been hiking for hours, following an old trail that wasn't marked on any map I owned, the kind of path that starts off obvious, wide enough for a truck once, then slowly narrows until it's just a suggestion of where people used to walk. The forest around it felt layered, like time itself had settled there. Old trees leaning against younger ones, moss thick enough to swallow stones whole, fallen trunks that had rotted so completely they'd collapsed into soft ridges in the dirt. The air smelled damp and metallic, like rain that never fully left. I wasn't looking for water. I wasn't even fishing that day. I just wanted quiet, a place where nothing needed me. Then I noticed how quiet it already was. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind where birds chirp and leaves rustle gently. This was an empty quiet, the kind that presses against your ears until you notice your own breathing too clearly. I followed it. That's when I saw the clearing. It wasn't large, just a bowl carved out of the forest floor, ringed by trees that leaned inward slightly like they were listening. At the center sat a pool of water, perfectly round, dark enough that I couldn't tell how deep it went. The surface was completely still. No ripples, no debris, no reflection of the sky overhead, only trees. The ground around the pool was smooth, worn down in a way that didn't make sense. No exposed roots, no rocks, just packed earth, shaped by countless footsteps pacing the same path over and over again. I stood there longer than I meant to. Something about the place made it hard to leave, not in a dramatic way. It didn't feel threatening. It felt familiar, like returning to a spot you'd forgotten you loved. When I finally moved closer, I noticed something else. There were no insects, no flies, no mosquitoes, no dragonflies skimming the surface. The water was untouched. I didn't fish that first day. I just sat, listening to nothing, watching the water refuse to move. When I finally turned to leave, I had the strangest feeling that I was stepping away from someone mid-conversation. I came back the next day with my rod. I told myself it was curiosity. A strange place deserved another look, but deep down it felt more like obligation, like the clearing expected me. The moment I cast my line, the bobber sank. No tug, no struggle. I reeled in a fish so pristine it looked unreal. No scars, no parasites, no cloudiness in the eyes. Its scales caught the light perfectly like they'd never known resistance. When I dropped it back into the water, it didn't thrash. It didn't dart away. It hovered there, suspended just beneath the surface, watching me. Then it sank straight down without breaking the water. I didn't notice the footprints until my third visit. They were subtle at first, depressions in the dirt that didn't quite match my stride. Bare feet, longer than mine, toes pressed too deeply into the earth, like whoever made them carried more weight than they should have. The prints circled the pool. They never crossed it. They never left. I told myself they were old, that rain had distorted them, that my mind was filling in details because I wanted a story. But every time I came back, there were more, and they were fresher. I began to notice time behaving strangely there. Hours slipped by without warning. My phone battery drained faster than it should have. The sun seemed reluctant to move once it hit a certain angle above the trees. The first time I heard the voice, I almost dropped my knife. "You cut that wrong," it said calmly. I turned so fast I made myself dizzy. No one was there. The voice hadn't echoed. It hadn't traveled. It sounded like it had come from right beside me. I laughed, loud, nervous. I said something out loud. I don't even remember what, just to hear my own voice fill the space. The water rippled once, then stilled again. I stopped laughing. "You'll ruin the meat if you rush," the voice continued. It wasn't mocking me. It wasn't threatening. It sounded patient, like it had all the time in the world. I asked who was there. The voice didn't answer, but the fish in the water moved, dozens of them, drifting just beneath the surface, their shapes faint but unmistakable, all facing me. I left without packing properly. I didn't fish for weeks after that, but I dreamed about the hole. I dreamed of standing at its edge at night, lantern light flickering across the water. Faces floated beneath the surface, not dead, not alive, familiar in ways I couldn't explain. People I almost recognized, people who felt like unfinished thoughts. They never spoke in the dreams, they just waited. When I finally went back, the clearing felt different, heavier, like it was relieved. "You came back," the voice said, not accusing, just acknowledging. I asked what it was. The water darkened. "I am where things are left," it replied. "What things?" I asked. There was a pause long enough that my skin prickled. "Pieces," it said. I noticed then that the footprints extended into the water, bare impressions pressed into the silty bottom, visible just beneath the surface. They stopped suddenly, like whoever made them had stood still and never moved again. I asked if anyone had drowned there. The voice almost laughed. "No," it said. "They stayed." That night I heard voices while I slept. Not screaming, not crying, talking. Quiet conversations layered over one another like a room full of people whispering secrets they didn't want to forget. When I woke, my tent was wet. Not with rain, with lake water. The next time I visited, I brought someone else. I told myself I needed proof. That hearing things alone didn't mean anything. That I needed someone to see it with me so I could finally let it go. He never described what he saw. He just said the water knew him, said it remembered something he'd lost. After that, he avoided mirrors, avoided lakes, avoided silence. I stopped going. Years passed. Then one night, I heard dripping in my house. Slow, patient. It took me a long time to realize the sound was coming from inside my walls, from beneath the floor, from somewhere deep enough that light couldn't reach. When I went back for the last time, the clearing was waiting. The water was higher, darker, fuller. "You took too long," the voice said gently. I asked what it wanted. The water rippled outward, slow and even. "Nothing," it said, "only what is already leaning toward me." I felt something brush my ankle. Cold, familiar, like water closing around skin. I ran. I don't fish anymore. But sometimes, when I stand near still water, I feel it watching, listening, waiting for me to remember what I left behind. Because the fishing hole never dried up, and it never forgets. I've camped alone before. That's not the part that scares me. What scares me is that night in the woods where I realized I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there knew I preferred to be. I grew up around forests, Appalachian forests, the kind that roll forever, where Virginia quietly becomes West Virginia without asking permission. Trees stacked on trees, ridges behind ridges, places where the map looks simple, but the ground never is. I planned the trip to be quiet. 2 nights. One campsite I'd used before, tucked near a ridgeline overlooking a narrow valley. No trails nearby, no water access close enough to draw crowds. Just me, my pack, and the fire. The hike in was uneventful, leaves crunching under boots, wind threading through branches, that familiar smell of damp soil and pine sap. Everything felt normal, almost welcoming. That should have been my first warning. The campsite was exactly how I remembered it. A small clearing, a ring of stones from previous fires, trees spaced just far enough apart that the light could still reach the ground. I set up my tent, stacked firewood, and lit the fire just as the sun slipped behind the ridge. Night fell fast. It always does in those mountains. The fire crackled softly. I ate, leaned back, and listened to the forest wake up. Crickets, owls, the distant snap of a branch somewhere downhill. The sounds layered themselves into that familiar nighttime rhythm. That's when I noticed something missing. The wind. It hadn't died down gradually. It just stopped. No leaves moving, no branches creaking. The fire still burned, but the smoke rose straight up like a column. I remember thinking how strange that was. How the wood suddenly felt staged, like a set waiting for actors to step into frame. I shook it off. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not close. Far enough that I couldn't place them. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching leaves somewhere beyond the firelight. I froze. I told myself it was a deer, or maybe a black bear moving through, but the rhythm was wrong, too steady, too careful. Then it stopped. I waited. Nothing. The forest noises slowly crept back in, like they'd been holding their breath. I told myself I was tired, that my brain was filling in gaps. I added more wood to the fire and crawled into my tent. I didn't sleep. Every time I started to drift, I'd feel that unmistakable sensation, the one you get when you're being watched, not imagined, not nervous, instinctive. At some point, I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer now, slow, measured, crunch, pause, crunch. They circled my campsite, not rushing, not sneaking, just walking. I held my breath, listening, heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard outside the tent. I waited for the sound of fabric brushing the tent wall, for a sniff, a cough, anything. Instead, the footsteps stopped directly behind my tent, right where my head was, and then a voice spoke. Fire's still warm. It was calm, observational, like someone making conversation. My blood went cold. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The voice stayed quiet for a long time. Then it spoke again. You always camp alone? That's when I realized something was very wrong. The voice sounded like it was coming from behind the tent, but also from everywhere else, as if the woods themselves were shaping the sound, bending it through branches and leaves. I stayed silent. Another pause. Then the voice said, my name, perfectly, no question, no hesitation, just my name. I don't remember deciding to scream. I don't remember deciding to run. I only remember the zipper of the tent ripping open and the cold night air hitting my face as I stumbled out into the clearing. The fire was still burning, but the woods were silent, completely silent. No insects, no wind, no owls, just me and the fire and the dark tree line. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, sweeping the beam across the trunks. Nothing, no movement, no shadows that didn't belong. And then I saw the footprints. They weren't human. They weren't animal either. They looked like bare feet, but stretched. Toes too long, heels too narrow, pressed deep into the soft earth, like whatever made them was heavier than it should have been. The prints stopped at the edge of my tent, and then they started again, leading away, downhill, into the valley. I didn't follow them. I packed up in record time, hands shaking so badly I dropped things without realizing. I didn't bother putting the fire out properly. I didn't care about leaving gear behind. I just needed to move. The trail back wasn't marked well, but I knew the general direction. I kept my flashlight on, swinging it constantly, refusing to let the darkness settle. Halfway down the ridge, the voice came back. Not behind me, ahead. Wrong way, it said gently. I stopped dead. My light caught movement between the trees, not a body, not a shape, just darkness bending where it shouldn't. I turned and ran the other way. Branches tore at my clothes, roots tripped me. I fell hard, rolled, scrambled back up. Behind me, something moved, not chasing, not fleeing, just keeping pace. Then it started talking again, but it wasn't using my name anymore. It was using my voice, calling out calmly, reassuringly, "Hey, it's okay. Slow down. You're almost there." I clamped my hands over my ears and ran until my lungs burned. Eventually, the ground leveled out. I burst onto the gravel road just as dawn began to lighten the sky. I collapsed there, sobbing, shaking, exhausted. When I finally worked up the courage to look back, the forest edge looked normal. Too normal. No movement, no sound, just trees. I didn't camp alone again for years. And even now, when I'm deep in the woods and the wind suddenly stops, I don't speak. I don't respond. Because whatever lives out there, it listens and it learns. I found the cabin because I was lost. Not dramatically lost. Not panicking or running from anything. Just that quiet kind of lost where the trail stops making sense and you realize you've been walking longer than you planned. The forest had thinned enough that the sunlight came down in long, slanted beams, catching dust and pollen in the air. Everything smelled like damp wood and old leaves. I remember thinking how still it was, not silent, just paused, like the woods were waiting for something to happen. That's when I saw the roof, just the edge of it at first, dark and crooked between the trees. I almost walked past it, assuming it was nothing more than a fallen shed or an old hunting blind. But then the light caught a window. Glass. Intact. That's what made me stop. Cabins abandoned long enough usually lose their windows first. Wind, storms, curious animals, people passing through. This one looked kept. Not clean, not new, but maintained in a way that felt deliberate. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The cabin sat in a shallow clearing pressed into the earth like it had grown there instead of being built. The wood was darkened with age, warped slightly but solid. The door hung straight. The roof sagged just enough to suggest time, not neglect. And there were footprints, fresh ones, leading up to the door, but none leading away. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. No voices, no movement. But something inside the cabin shifted. Not footsteps, more like weight settling. I told myself someone lived there, a recluse, a hunter, someone who didn't want to be found. That thought should have been enough to make me leave. Instead, I knocked. The sound felt wrong the moment my knuckles hit the wood. Too loud, too sharp. It echoed longer than it should have, bouncing off the trees and coming back thinner, distorted. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again. This time something knocked back. Not from the door. From inside the walls. 3 slow taps, perfectly spaced. I stepped back, heart racing, and called out, "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I'm just passing through." Silence. Then the door opened. Just a crack. Enough for me to see darkness inside. Thick darkness. The kind that doesn't reflect light at all. Something stood behind the door. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its attention. It didn't speak. It waited. I got turned around, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was hoping to get my bearings. The door opened a little more. Inside, the air smelled old, not rot, not mold, dry, like dust that had never been disturbed. I noticed then that the interior wasn't dark because of a lack of light. There were windows, several of them. They just didn't let light in. "Come in," a voice said. It sounded almost right, almost human. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, not cold, just absent. Like warmth had never been invited in. The cabin was furnished, a table, 2 chairs, a cot, shelves lined with jars and tools. Everything looked used, but not recently, like someone had studied how humans lived and recreated it from memory. The floorboards didn't creak when I stepped. They absorbed sound. I turned to thank the person who'd opened the door. There was no one there. The door closed behind me, softly, too softly. I told myself it was nerves, that my eyes were adjusting, that the person had stepped away. Then I noticed the chair across from me was warm. Someone had been sitting there, recently. "Sit," the voice said, now coming from somewhere above me, from the beams, from the walls. I didn't. I asked who they were. There was a pause, a long one. "I stay here," it said. That wasn't an answer. I asked if anyone else lived nearby. "No," it said, "not anymore." Something about that phrasing made my stomach twist. I asked how long it had been there. "Longer than the cabin," it replied. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just slipped out. The sound died halfway through, swallowed by the room. The voice didn't react. It said, "You make noise like the others did." I asked who the others were. The floor creaked then, not under my feet, behind me. I turned slowly. The back wall of the cabin wasn't a wall at all. It was covered in markings, not writing, not symbols, impressions, handprints, hundreds of them, overlapping, pressed deep into the wood as if it had been soft when they touched it. Different sizes, some stretched too long, some with too many fingers. I felt my throat tighten. "Those are not all human," the voice said calmly. I asked what it was. The cabin seemed to breathe. The beams above me shifted, groaning quietly like joints adjusting. "I keep what stays," it said. I took a step toward the door. The room tilted, not physically, perceptually, like my sense of direction had been nudged sideways. "Don't rush," the voice said. "They always rush." I demanded it let me leave. There was another pause. Then the voice said, "You already came inside." I felt something brush my shoulder. Not a hand, not fur, pressure. Like air folding around me, I spun around, swinging my arm through empty space. The room looked the same, but it felt crowded. I could sense shapes just beyond my vision, standing where light refused to settle. "You're not like the others," the voice said. "You notice." That was worse than if it had threatened me. I backed toward the door, refusing to take my eyes off the room. My fingers brushed the handle. It was warm, breathing. I yanked it open and stumbled outside. The forest rushed back in all at once. Sound, wind, light. Like the world had been holding its breath until I escaped. I ran. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs shook. When I finally slowed, I realized something terrifying. The cabin wasn't behind me. It wasn't anywhere. The clearing was gone. No flattened earth, no path, no sign of a structure ever being there. Just trees. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the handprints, felt the way the room had leaned toward me. Days later, I found dirt under my fingernails, dark, dry, not from the forest, from old wood. Sometimes, when my house is quiet at night, I hear 3 slow taps, not on the door, from inside the walls, and I know the cabin is still there, not waiting, living, because it was never abandoned. It was occupied. People ask why folks in the mountains shut their windows early, lock the doors twice, and don't go out after dark like the night is something you can offend. Outsiders laugh and blame bears or old-fashioned habits. But the truth is simpler and worse. The dark out there isn't empty. It listens. When I was a kid, my grandmother treated sundown like a deadline. Once the last light slipped behind the ridge, she went room to room, closing every window, latching them hard, then pulling the curtains like she was sealing a jar. Dogs came inside. Doors got checked, not panicked, practiced, like brushing your teeth. I cracked my bedroom window one July night because it was hot, and she caught it within minutes. She shut it, latched it, pulled the curtain, and leaned close enough that I could smell coffee on her breath. "Listen," she whispered. At first I heard nothing. Then, faintly, outside the wall, a slow scrape, like fingernails dragging along siding. Patient, curious. It moved a few feet, stopped, moved again. My stomach turned cold. She whispered, "If it can smell your breath, it can learn your name." She left me there with the curtain shut and the scrape continuing like someone redding the house with their hands. The next morning, I asked my grandfather what it was. He stared toward the tree line and said, "Could be anything." Then he added, "But you don't invite anything inside." That's the first reason people shut everything up at night. Not because they're scared of one specific thing, but because the night tests boundaries. A cracked window is an offer. An unlocked door is permission. And some things don't break in. They wait for you to let them. I learned the hard way when a neighbor, new to the area, confident, friendly, heard a knock after midnight. 3 slow taps, not urgent, almost polite. He snapped on his porch light and yelled into the dark like it was a trespasser. Then a voice answered from the trees, gentle as a loved one. "Open up. It's me. I forgot my key." The trouble was, the person it sounded like was already inside his house. He didn't notice the impossibility. He stepped off the porch to help, and the darkness swallowed him after 3 steps. We heard a wet shuffle across leaves like something dragging weight. He made one choke sound, like his breath got stolen, and then the night went quiet again. Porch light stayed on until morning. They found him days later, sitting at the edge of a creek like he was resting, eyes open, mouth faintly smiling, not torn, not mauled, just wrong, like someone had taken what makes a person respond and left the rest. After that, families tightened their rules. You don't answer knocks after dark. You don't call names into the woods. And if you hear a voice that sounds familiar, you don't trust it just because it knows the right tone. Because that's the second reason people lock up, the night copies. A friend of mine called me shaking one fall night, whispering that someone was walking around his house. Crunch, pause, crunch. He said the dogs wouldn't bark. Then he whispered, "It's looking up at my window." Before I could tell him to back away, a voice outside spoke, soft, close, using his uncle's voice. "Open up. I forgot my key." But his uncle was asleep in the next room. My friend didn't answer. He didn't move. He just breathed shallow and tried not to exist. The voice repeated the line like it was practicing. Then it laughed, dry and clicking like something pretending it understood humor. 3 taps followed, then 3 more, then a slow drag along the siding like nails writing. The call cut out. By dawn, his front door was open and he was gone. They found him not far into the trees, barefoot, standing upright between 2 trunks like he'd simply stopped walking. His fingernails were broken, like he'd tried to claw his way back into something. He came home alive, but not all of them came back. After that, nobody on that road slept with a window cracked. Nobody left curtains open for the view. And that's the third reason people don't go out at night. Sometimes you return, but you don't return right. Something follows you back in your head. Something learns your rhythm and starts using it. There's also a sign the older folks watch for. Not footsteps, not voices. Silence, the sudden absence of insects. The wind dying all at once, even the creek sounding like it's holding its breath. That silence isn't peace, it's attention. It means something is close enough that everything else is trying not to be noticed. On those nights, the woods feel nearer than they should. Your porch light doesn't reach as far. Shadows lean in like they're listening through the glass. So people shut their windows because they know the night tests seams. They lock doors because they know some things don't want your stuff. They want your access. They want the moment you open up and confirm you're there. They want you to respond because response is proof. And proof makes you real. If you ever stay in a house tucked deep where the stars look sharp and the trees feel too close, and you see the host latch every window at dusk, don't tease them. Help them. Pull the curtains. Bring the dogs in. Check the locks twice. And if you hear a knock, 3 slow taps, followed by a voice that sounds like someone you trust saying your name. Don't answer, because the mountains aren't afraid of the dark. They're respectful. They've learned what the dark contains. And in places like that, the oldest rule is the one that keeps getting proven. The night will try to come inside and it only needs one small opening to decide you belong to it now. I didn't believe in haunted trails. I believed in exhaustion, in bad navigation, in human error. When hikers went missing, I assumed they panicked, wandered off, or trusted the wrong map. That's what I told myself when I first heard about the trail. It didn't have a name. Locals just called it the old path, and even that felt reluctant, like they were giving it more attention than it deserved. I heard about it at a gas station just outside a small mountain town. I asked the clerk where the best long hike was, something quiet, something untouched. He stared at me for a moment too long. "There's a trail past a ridge," he said slowly, "but it doesn't like visitors." I laughed. "Trails don't get opinions." He didn't laugh back. "Things move up there," he said. "People set things down and don't find them where they left them. Markers change. Folks walk in circles without knowing why." That should have been my warning. But curiosity has always been louder than caution. The trailhead wasn't marked. No signpost, no map board. Just a narrow dirt path slipping into the trees like it had been worn down by time rather than feet. The air felt heavier the moment I stepped off the main road. Not colder, just thicker, like the forest was holding its breath. The first few miles were uneventful. Tall trees filtered sunlight, the distant sound of water somewhere downhill. Red triangular trail blazes appeared every so often, nailed into trunks at eye level. Old, but clear enough. That's why I noticed when one wasn't where it should be. I passed a blaze on a white oak, left side of the trail, just after crossing a fallen log. 10 minutes later, I stopped to drink water and glanced back. The blaze was still there, but it was on the right side of the trail now. I told myself I'd misremembered. Trails curved, trees blur together. It was easy to confuse one marker for another. Still, unease settled in my stomach. By late afternoon, the forest had grown quieter. No birds, no insects. Even my footsteps sounded muffled, like the ground was absorbing the noise. I checked my compass, still working, and made note of my heading. When I reached a clearing, I sat down to rest. That's when my compass disappeared. I knew exactly where I'd put it. Front pocket. Zipped. I stood up, emptied my pack, checked every pocket twice. Nothing. I even retraced my steps a few yards. When I turned back, a new trail marker had appeared on a tree I was certain had been bare minutes earlier. It was lower than the others, crooked, and scratched into the bark rather than nailed. I camped that night because pushing forward felt wrong, and turning back felt worse. I built a small fire, cooked my meal, and lined my gear neatly beside the tent. I'm meticulous when I camp. Everything has its place. Disorder invites mistakes. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. No sound had stirred me. I just opened my eyes. The fire was still glowing faintly. Shadows stretched long between the trees, and somewhere nearby, something moved. Not heavy footsteps, not snapping branches. Just a soft, rapid patter like bare feet on leaves. I stayed still. A shape darted past the edge of my tent, short, fast, and low to the ground. Then another. They moved with confidence like they knew the terrain intimately. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for fear to pass. When morning came, my boots were gone. Not missing. Relocated. I found them hanging from a sapling branch 20 yards away, laces tied together in a neat knot. My food bag had been opened, nothing eaten, just sorted. granola bars lined up side by side, utensils stacked, a pine cone placed deliberately on top, like punctuation. That's when I found the carvings. Small symbols etched into fallen logs and rocks, spirals, arrows, little figures with long limbs and pointed hats. Some were faded with age, others looked freshly cut. As I packed up, laughter echoed through the trees, high-pitched, breathless, curious. I followed the trail for hours that day and somehow ended up back at my own campsite. Same fire ring, same scorch marks, same tree with a split trunk. I hadn't turned around once. My compass, when it reappeared tucked into my pack without explanation, insisted I'd been moving forward the entire time. That night, I spoke. "I don't want trouble," I said into the dark. "I'll leave in the morning." Something small tossed a pebble that landed at my feet. Then they came into the firelight. They were no taller than my knee, thin, wiry bodies, skin textured like bark and moss, eyes bright and reflective, catching the fire like polished stones. Their clothes were stitched from leaves, twine, scraps of old trail ribbon, even bits of faded map. Trail elves. The words surfaced in my mind fully formed. They weren't angry, just alert, observant. One stepped forward and held out my compass. Another adjusted a trail marker behind it, turning it just slightly. "You walk loud," the first said. Its voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "And straight. Straight walking forgets the land." I asked what they wanted. "To keep paths alive," it said. "To remind wanderers that trails are agreements, not ownership." By morning, they were gone. My gear was returned. The trail markers were restored but faint, like they were already being erased. I followed them out without interference. When I reached the road and looked back, the trail was already closing in on itself, leaves drifting down to hide its entrance. I never told anyone where it was. Some trails don't want to be found, and some are still being rearranged. I've always liked fireflies. They made the woods feel gentle at night, like the dark was alive but friendly, little drifting sparks that reminded you summer was still holding on. That's what I thought they were when I first saw them that night, just fireflies. I was camping at a public campground tucked deep into the woods, nothing remote or forbidden. Families nearby, a couple of tents scattered through the trees, the kind of place that feels safe simply because other people are close enough to hear you shout. The fireflies started appearing just after sunset. At first, they hovered near the tree line, soft yellow lights blinking on and off, slow and lazy, normal, comforting. I sat by the fire and watched them drift in loose patterns, rising and falling like they were breathing. Then, one light blinked differently. It didn't flicker randomly like the others. It pulsed, steady, deliberate, on, off. And it wasn't floating, it was moving. The light slid between the trees, weaving around trunks, staying low to the ground. When I stood up, it paused. When I took a step forward, it drifted deeper into the woods. I smiled to myself. Fireflies scatter when you approach. Everyone knows that. But this one didn't run. It waited. Another light appeared beside it, then another. Soon there were dozens, but they weren't scattered like fireflies should be. They formed a loose line, stretching away from the campground and into the forest. A path of lights. The air felt suddenly cooler, quieter. The sounds of nearby campers faded like someone had turned the volume down on the world. I took a few steps toward the trees. The lights brightened. They didn't blink out of sync. They pulsed together like a heartbeat. And that's when the thought crept in, uninvited and dangerous. Follow us. Not a voice, not exactly, just a feeling, heavy and persuasive, settling behind my eyes. A certainty that if I stepped off the trail and into the dark, I'd see something incredible, something meant just for me. The first light drifted farther in, bobbing gently like it was encouraging me. I crossed the edge of the campsite. The forest swallowed sound almost immediately. The ground dipped, uneven and unfamiliar. I glanced back and couldn't see my fire anymore. That's when I noticed the lights weren't insects. Fireflies don't cast shadows. These did. The glow stretched thin, warping around tree trunks. Sometimes the light would elongate, like it was attached to something just out of sight. Sometimes it would rise too high, too smoothly, as if lifted by something tall. The feeling in my head intensified just a little farther. My feet moved before I fully realized it. One step, then another. I stopped myself, heart pounding, and tried to laugh it off. "This is stupid," I muttered. The lights dimmed instantly, not faded, withdrew. The woods felt wrong now, heavy, expectant. I realized I didn't know which direction I'd come from. The lights shifted again, rearranging themselves, no longer forming a path, more like a loose circle. That's when one of them got close, too close. The glow hovered at chest height, steady and bright. Within it, something moved, shapes folding and unfolding like fingers trying to remember how to be light. I stumbled backward. The glow surged forward. "Hey!" A human voice cut through the trees like a rope thrown to someone drowning. Flashlight snapped on. White beams sliced through the darkness. The glow recoiled instantly, snapping back into the trees like it had been yanked away. Hands grabbed my arms and pulled me backward, hard. "Don't follow the lights," a man shouted. "Don't ever follow them." I fell back into the campsite, shaking. The warmth of the fire hit me all at once. The noise returned. Crickets, voices, reality. The campers stood between me and the trees, flashlights raised. An older woman looked at me with something between pity and fear. "They're not fireflies," she said quietly. "They never were." I asked what they were. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. They mimic what you trust. Light, familiar movement, curiosity." Another camper spoke up. "People wander off chasing them. Think they're seeing something magical. Trails don't matter after that." "They don't find most of them," the woman added. "Just their gear, sometimes rearranged, sometimes not." We watched the tree line together. Far back in the woods, the lights blinked once more, soft and inviting, before fading out completely. No one slept much that night. In the morning, the forest looked normal again, peaceful, sunlit, harmless. But as I packed up, I noticed something carved into a nearby tree, a small spiral, and beneath it, scratched deep enough to last, "Don't follow the lights now. When I see fireflies, I still smile. But I never follow them, and neither should you." I went into the woods to hunt deer. That's all it was supposed to be. A weekend trip. One rifle, one pack, and a stretch of land I'd walked more times than I could count. I knew the trails, the ridges, the places deer like to cross just before dawn. What I didn't expect was to be recognized. It was early morning when I saw him. The sky was still pale, fog hanging low between the trees, muting sound and distance. I was easing along an old logging trail when I noticed a figure ahead of me, standing completely still. At first I thought he was a stump. Then he shifted. He was an old man dressed head to toe in faded hunting gear, wool jacket, orange vest so worn it looked brown, and a rifle resting casually against his shoulder. His posture was relaxed, like someone who'd spent a lifetime in the woods and didn't feel rushed by anything anymore. I raised a hand in greeting. "Morning," I called. He turned slowly, studying me with sharp, pale eyes. "Morning, Evan," he said. I stopped dead. I hadn't spoken my name. No one else was hunting this far back. My truck was the only one at the pull-off. I stared at him, trying to place his face. "Do I know you?" I asked. He smiled faintly, like the question amused him. "Not the way you're thinking," he said. "You walk like your father did, heavy on the heels." That sent a chill through me. My father had hunted this land when I was a kid, years ago, but he'd stopped coming after an injury. He never mentioned anyone fitting this man's description. The old hunter stepped closer. I noticed then how quiet he was. No crunch of leaves, no shift of gear. The wood seemed to lean away from him as if making room. "You won't see much movement today," he said. "Wind's wrong." I nodded automatically. It was true. The wind had shifted sometime during the night. But there was something off about the way he spoke, not like advice, like certainty. I asked him how long he'd been hunting back here. He looked past me toward the deeper woods. "Longer than I planned," he said. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he tilted his head, listening. "You should head east," he added. "Trail's clearer that way. Don't follow the creek." I was about to ask why when he stepped back into the fog, just backed away. No sound, no movement of branches. 1 second he was there, then the fog closed in, and he was gone. I didn't see another hunter all day. That night, back at camp, I mentioned it to a group of guys cooking over a fire. One of them froze when I described the man. "What'd you say his name was?" he asked. "I didn't," I said. "But he knew mine." The man swallowed. "Did he have an old orange vest, real faded?" I nodded. He poked at the fire, not looking at me. "That sounds like Harold Klein." The name meant nothing to me. "He went missing 10 years ago," the man continued. "Opening weekend, walked out before dawn. Never came back. They found his rifle by the creek a week later. No tracks, no blood, just gone." I told him what the old man had said, especially about not following the creek. Silence fell over the group. "That's where they found a rifle," someone finally said. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I walked back toward where I'd seen him. The fog was gone, sunlight filtering through the trees. Near the trail, I found footprints. Only one set. Deep, old, pressed into the dirt like they'd been walked there over and over again. And beside them, nailed into a tree, was a rusted trail marker, an orange hunting tag. The name Harold Klein was barely readable. No dates. I left the woods that afternoon. Sometimes I think he was alive. A man who never left, who learned the land so well it forgot to make noise around him. Other times, I think he never left because he couldn't. Either way, I still hunt those woods. And every now and then, when the fog rolls in just right, I feel someone watching me, making sure I don't follow the creek. I never believed in skinwalkers. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every hiker has. Old legends told around fires by people who want an excuse for strange sounds in the dark. I always figured if you spent enough time alone in the woods, your brain would start filling in gaps that didn't need filling. That belief didn't survive one trail. It was late afternoon when I first saw her. I was hiking a long, narrow trail that cut through a dense forest and climbed toward a rocky overlook. The path was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the woods are listening. I'd been walking for hours when I noticed a figure ahead of me, standing just off the trail. An old woman. She was hunched over, wrapped in a long gray shawl that dragged slightly along the ground. Her hair hung loose and white, almost blending into the bark of the trees behind her. She stood so still that at first I thought she was waiting for someone. "Ma'am," I called out, "you all right?" She turned slowly. Her face looked wrong, not monstrous, not distorted, but unfinished, like it didn't quite belong to the rest of her body. Her eyes were sharp and dark, too alert for someone her age, and they locked onto me with an intensity that made my steps slow. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was calm, but thin. "You shouldn't be up here this late." I glanced at the sky. The sun was still well above the tree line. "I'll be heading back soon," I said. "Trail's clear, though." She nodded, but her gaze drifted past me, into the woods. "Not everything on a trail is meant to be followed," she said. I laughed awkwardly. "That's one way to put it." She smiled then, and it was the first thing that truly unsettled me. Her mouth curved upward, but the rest of her face didn't move. No warmth, no kindness, just the shape of a smile. "People forget," she said. "They see fur, feathers, skin, and they stop looking." I didn't know how to respond to that. A sudden wind moved through the trees stronger than it should have been. The leaves rattled overhead. I felt the temperature drop, fast and sharp. When I looked back at her, she was changing, not in a dramatic way. No cracking bones, no screams, just shifting. Her shoulders pulled inward, her shawl folding in on itself like it was being swallowed. Her arms drew close to her body, shortening, thinning. Her face blurred, not fading, but stretching, reshaping. Her eyes stayed the same. They never left mine. Feathers pushed through her skin like they'd always been there. Her nose pulled forward, sharpening into a beak. Her body lightened, shrinking, compacting. In seconds, the old woman was gone. An owl stood where she had been, large, pale, silent. It tilted its head at me the same way she had moments before, the same intelligence, the same attention. Then it spread its wings. The wingspan was too wide, the movement too deliberate. As it lifted off the ground, the air rushed past me, cold and heavy, carrying a sound I can only describe as wrong, not a flap, but a release. The owl flew into the trees and disappeared. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, I realized my hands were shaking. I turned around and walked back the way I came, never once looking off the trail. I told myself there was a rational explanation. Stress, light, fatigue, anything but what I'd seen. But that explanation never held, because halfway back, I passed an owl perched on a low branch. It watched me. Didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. I nodded to it without thinking, a small, respectful gesture, the kind you give a stranger who deserves it. It nodded back. Now, every time I hike that trail, I remember her words. Not everything on a trail is meant to be followed, and I never assume an animal is just an animal, or that a human is always human. Some things wear whatever shape suits them, and the woods know the difference.